Hello Proponomics people, and welcome to this week's 4 Pillars of Property Investment video. For those who haven't seen one of these before, the 4 Pillars is a strategic framework that I came up with myself. I used to get told again and again when I was earlier on in property that it was all about the deals and the money. Find the deals and the money, that's all you need to do. I'm afraid that's not correct. Yes, you absolutely need deals and money, and they are two absolutely critical parts of any property investment or property development business. But you've also got to deliver. Right, that's got to happen. It doesn't just do itself, unfortunately. Bad news for those who think that it does. And also you've got to be able to manage those assets. If you're going to hold on to them between the cradle and the grave of that asset's lifespan, you have got the asset management responsibility. And those two things are equally as important as deals and money in my experience. And that's why there are 4 pillars. We're on the second pillar in this series. That is the finance pillar. So that is about money. And we're on the right-hand side of the equation. So each pillar has 7 sub-pillars. On the left-hand side, we have 3 entry-level style, strategies, tactics, various other bits, things of importance. And then on the right-hand side of the sub-pillars, we have 4 more advanced. So not for the faint-hearted, not for newbies, not things you should really do on your first deal, in my opinion. And it is, of course, all only my opinion. So you're free to listen to and disagree with or agree with whatever you like, whatever you feel. I'd love it if you leave me a comment, because I love getting comments on the YouTube. Thank you very much. So today is about the bridger's money. So I want to sick that of our 7 financial sub-pillars, and it's about bridging finance. So I have done many hundreds of bridging loans with only a small handful of providers. I'll be honest, I've only used ever about 4 firms. I think I'd have to go back and verify that. Vast majority, 80% plus of my volume with one firm, and then about 18% plus with a second firm, and then some very short and not so sweet relationships with some other ones who basically didn't really do what they said they were going to do. So I never went back. So as I say, hundreds of bridges, over 8 figures, well into the 8 figures worth of bridging finance taken out and repaid, which of course the bridges are very happy about. Although really, there's an old rule in bridging, and that is like the old rule in property. Don't take this too much to heart. A third you will have heard of. So that's a third goes on the land, a third goes on the build, and a third is your profit. Ha ha, those were the days. Wouldn't we love to go back there, property developers? Good luck if you're still delivering deals like that. And apart from anything else, you can rarely build something out for a third these days. The build costs look more like 40%. The land costs look more like 40%, if you're lucky. Or you find one with 10% land costs and 70% development costs. But you end up with a 20% margin if you're thereabouts. This is why I don't do too much development, because I think that margin is too skinny for the work, time, effort and risk involved, and I don't enjoy the process very much either. But there's a rule like that in bridging, and it's 30, 30, 30, 10. So what does that mean? Well, it means 30% of your bridging loans are going to get paid back early, 30% are going to get paid back on time, 30% of them are going to get paid back late. What do you think that leaves the 10% for? I'm afraid it's bad news, guys. Those are the 10% that don't come back at all. Now, of course, like all of these rules of thumb, that's all it is, a rule of thumb. I'm sure there aren't 10% of bridging loans going wonky these days, but there are more than 1%. So recovery has to be something the bridgers are very good at. And that is exactly how they underwrite every loan they look at. What if we have to take this asset away? What if we have to take control of this asset away from the developer or investor? That is how they underwrite deals. The best bridgers, in my opinion, underwrite both the deal and the person. Because no point funding a great deal if you're giving them money to a melon, because you're not going to get it back, or they're going to spend it on something else before they pay you back anyway. Right, so underwrite the deal and the money. That's the secret from their end of the fence, but also be great at recovery. Be very good at staying in communication and getting money back if you need to. Quite a simple process, usually for them, because they've got quite onerous terms and conditions that allow them to do things like appoint LPA receivers pretty much at the drop of a hat if you're in default. And there's all sorts of terms usually in bridging loans and development loans that you should be aware of. You should read them. You should certainly read, if you're going to use the same firm again and again, I don't think you need to completely read it every time, although you can ask your solicitor to make you aware of any changes in those documents, or their solicitor to make you aware. That is a very good idea. But you should certainly read them and understand every single word the first time you take a bridge out. Now, this video isn't supposed to be putting anybody off bridging. When someone asked me yesterday, what is the number one thing you could attribute your success in scaling your property investment group to, I would say it's bridging. I always say it's bridging. I avoided bridging for years. I was scared of it. I ran scared of it. I was too worried. I thought the bridges were too sharp. The rates were too high. 2016 came along and it was a bit of a perfect storm scenario. Yields had dropped quite significantly, so bridging was starting to look really, really cheap. You were seeing some adverts for money at things like 0.49% a month and rates like that, and you were thinking, blimey, what's the catch? Now, usually there is a catch with those sorts of loans because they're out there advertising that 0.49% rate, but what they don't tell you is it's 2% in, 2% out, various arrangement fees, administration fees, fees for them getting out of bed, fees for them sending you a statement, fees, and they withhold the money up front so you don't get anywhere near as much as you thought you were going to get when you actually draw down the funds. That doesn't have to be the case, but sometimes you just need to be careful with the marketing that people use, and you need to look at the total cost, including broker fees, including everything that you're going to pay for organising a bridge, because that's important. Then you need to work out what's going to happen if you are late. What if you're in that theoretical 30% that are late? What happens to you then, right? Do you go straight into default on a default rate and your 0.49 a month becomes 4.9% a month? That's not impossible, so you need to look out for that one. Do you have a 12-month time? Usually 12 months, but obviously can be shorter. After 12 months, do they add a rollover fee onto the loan, which is like paying another arrangement fee, really? Not necessarily the end of the world. Depends on the size of that rollover fee. Could be 5%, could be 10%, could be less, could be more. So just be very cautious about that. Again, the best bridgers understand what their clients are doing and they communicate well, but also the client has to communicate well in order to make that relationship work. So it's expensive money. And I started looking at deals when I was using bridging. For my first bridge, the deal actually covered the cost of the bridge because it was already cash flowing, and it was a case of optimizing a building rather than sort of starting from scratch. So it's like, well, if we can service the bridge, surely this is a good deal. And, largely speaking, we were right. It got me, what it really did is got me over my fear block that I had on bridging. And then I got comfortable with the fact that, well, hold on, this company's making cash flow every month. We're not looking to live off that at the moment. We're looking to reinvest it. So can I burn some of that cash flow and taking out bridging in order to expand more quickly? Why would bridging allow you to expand more quickly when instead of your traditional 25% deposit plus cost, so these days probably about 30% of the cost and then 75% borrowed on a mortgage, if you were buying at good value or you'd already bought at good value, you might be able to borrow up to 90% of the money on a bridging loan. And those, I say 90% because those sorts of products are widely available these days with some of the decent sized bridging lenders. So what's the catch? What's the caveat? That 90% can't be more than 70% of a RICS value. So you need to be buying at value. You need to be buying at BMV or whatever you want to call it. You need to be buying below RICS if you want to get that 90% of purchase price. But if you think 90%, so you need to put 10% in plus your 5% frictionals, you're putting 15% down rather than putting 30% down, you can literally buy twice as many deals if you can find them with the same amount of equity. And that was a game changer. Now, I personally have had 95%, 99%, 100%, and I don't mean one of these gimmicky 100%, which you have to watch out for, which is, we'll lend you 100%, but basically you've got to provide the security across 2 properties. So really we're doing a loan at about 50% loan to value. Well, big wow. I mean, pretty much anybody can do that, and we're charging you a handsome sum for it. You might as well remortgage the second property and then get a top-up from the target property or something like that. It's going to be much cheaper to do it that way, but it's going to take longer to remortgage it, of course. So this is what needs to be considered, right? But I'm talking about 100% where I've bought it cheap enough, so maybe at a 40% discount, such that the bridge is comfortable giving me 100% of the money. Still had to put in 5%, sometimes less if we're buying a company, because there isn't that 3% additional stamp to consider, but still had to put in 1-2% for frictional costs, of course. There have been times when we've bought companies that have got money in bank accounts, and we've been able to move that money straight back out as soon as we are in control of the bank account on the day of settlement. That's the holy grail, of course. And I tell you that to show you, you can imagine effectively in that situation, we've been able to buy using none of our own money effectively, or a daylight loan out of our own bank accounts or somebody else's bank account. So that's a higher level, of course, but we are, remember, talking about a more advanced concept. So bridging, great if you're buying at value, great to enable you to stretch your equity. They can move very quickly. So it really is as good as cash, especially once you've been through the process once with the right sorts of lenders. They lend money in 7 days all the time. So fantastic to work with. If you've got lots of leads, lots of deals you can actually convert on. If you haven't and you don't want to pay the bridging rates, well, I'd encourage you still to stack your deals as if you were using bridging, but if you've got the cash, that bridging money is going to you instead. I love using bridging these days because if it doesn't stack with a bridge, I don't want to do the deal, even if the money is sitting in the bank account. And even if the money is sitting in the bank account, I'll probably still take the bridge. Why would I do that? Why would I pay someone, something that's in the 10% region a year when I could use my own money? Because A, I'm looking for better than 10% returns on the equity that we've got in various companies, and that's an important one. And B, we don't know when the next great deal is going to come along. It might come across tomorrow where we really need that 100 grand in the bank because another great deal's coming and we need to put it into that deal, but we can't if we've already spent it on the first deal. So this is about juggling a deal pipeline, staying liquid. There's a price to staying liquid. Several percent a year we lose on the basis that we're staying liquid. It's not dissimilar in many ways to Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway. They have cash and cash equivalents, which these days are doing okay. They're only 4 or 5% if they're putting them in T-bills and things like that, but it keeps liquidity. So if anything goes wrong, what happens when something goes wrong? 2008 happens. You've got Goldman Sachs knocking on Warren Buffett's door trying to get money, and he does an incredible deal on the back of it that returns him a huge amount of money. And so cash is king in certain situations. And being liquid, what's the flip side of that? Well, if you're not liquid, then ultimately businesses go broke because of cash flow. This is why I built the portfolio from day one on the basis of higher yield cash flowing properties, because that legwork had to be done. And then I got more into actually, are the returns on these properties better or not than on higher cost, lower yielding properties? At the moment, the argument defeats itself because you can't hold lower yielding properties unless you've got so much cash you just need to deploy it, and you've got what I would call a capital allocation problem rather than I want to build my portfolio, I need momentum, I need deep value, I need to recycle problem, a scarcity of opportunity, scarcity of either enough money or enough deals to put through the system to get to where you want to be. So that is bridging. There are some great firms out there in the market. It's so different than it was 15 years ago or so when it was, very expensive, very few firms doing it. It's incredibly competitive. There are some great firms doing it, and I'm happy to talk about recommendations and things like that if you drop me a message on here in one of the comments, or if you give me a shout on my LinkedIn, Adam Lawrence, Proponomics founder on LinkedIn. You'll find me there if you're not already following me on there as well. That's how I'm doing majority of my social media communications these days. So I hope that video is useful. I'd love to hear any thoughts anybody's got. My moral of the story is don't be put off bridging, don't be scared of it, but do treat it with the relevant amount of respect that you need. And if you're finding decent BMV deals, bridging really needs to be part of your strategy, because that's going to enable you to hold on to 100% of the equity rather than JV it and work twice as hard for the same money. So think about it from that perspective. I'm not saying you should never JV. I've done tons and tons of JVs and I love JVing, but it does mean you've got to work harder, and it does mean you've got to do more output in order to get further forward more quickly. Otherwise, what's the point? Thanks for listening.